In the heart of the American Midwest, where endless fields of corn stretch across the horizon, and the wind carries the scent of soil and rain, farming has always been more than an occupation. It is a way of life shaped by seasons, risk, and tradition. In the early 20th century, this world was still largely defined by inherited knowledge. Farmers learned from their parents, and change came slowly, often reluctantly. Into this world was born a man who would challenge nearly every assumption about how farming should be done. Roswell Garst. Garst was born in 1898 into a farming family in Iowa, a region already known as one of the most productive agricultural areas in the country. From an early age, he understood the rhythms of farm life, the long hours, the dependence on weather, and the constant uncertainty that came with every planting season. But unlike many of his neighbors, Garst was not content with simply repeating what had always been done. He was observant, analytical, and deeply curious about why some farms produced better yields than others. This curiosity would become the foundation of his life's work. Garst grew up in a time when American agriculture was still transitioning from horse-drawn labor to mechanized farming. He witnessed both worlds, the traditional methods of plowing with animals and the early adoption of tractors and steel equipment. On his family farm, he learned discipline early. Chores began before sunrise and ended only when the day's work was done. But even as a boy, Garst asked questions that set him apart. Why did some fields produce more corn than others? Why did certain seeds grow taller or resist disease better? These questions would later define his entire career. After completing his education, Garst returned to Iowa to manage and eventually expand his own farming operations. He did not see farming as a static tradition, but as a field of experimentation. While many farmers focused on surviving season to season, Garst began thinking in terms of long-term improvement. By the 1920s and 1930s, American agriculture was undergoing significant change. Mechanization was increasing productivity, but crop yields were still limited by the quality of seed and soil management. Most farmers still relied on open-pollinated corn varieties, which were inconsistent from year to year. Scientists were beginning to explore something new: hybrid corn, a scientific breakthrough that could dramatically increase yield and resilience. However, many farmers were skeptical. Hybrid seeds were more expensive, and the results were not yet widely understood or trusted in rural communities. Garst, however, saw opportunity where others saw risk. He began experimenting with hybrid corn on his own farm, testing different varieties and carefully recording results. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he treated farming as both an art and a science. He believed that data, not tradition, should guide decisions. This mindset would eventually make him one of the most influential agricultural figures of his time. As Garst experimented with hybrid corn, he noticed something striking. The plants were not only more uniform, but also significantly more productive under the right conditions. Fields that previously produced modest harvests began yielding far more abundant crops. But success did not come easily. Early hybrids were sensitive and required careful management. Many farmers who tried them without proper guidance experienced mixed results, reinforcing skepticism in rural communities. Garst understood that the problem was not the seed itself, it was education. Farmers needed to understand how to use the new technology properly. So he did something unusual for a farmer. He became a teacher. He began inviting other farmers to his land, showing them side-by-side comparisons of traditional corn and hybrid varieties. He explained planting techniques, soil preparation, and fertilization strategies. Slowly, word began to spread that his fields consistently produced better results. This was the beginning of Garst's transformation from farmer to agricultural leader. By the 1940s, Roswell Garst's farm in Iowa was no longer just a working farm. It had become something far more unusual for its time: a living laboratory of modern agriculture. Farmers from across the Midwest began visiting to see what Garst was doing differently. They didn't come for entertainment. They came because something on his land was working in ways theirs was not. His corn stood taller, his yields were more consistent, and most importantly, his results could be repeated when others followed his methods correctly. At the center of it all was his commitment to hybrid corn, a technology that was still controversial in rural farming communities. While agricultural scientists were increasingly confident in hybrid seed development, many farmers still saw it as expensive, risky, and unpredictable. Garst had a different view. The problem wasn't the science, it was the lack of understanding. Instead of simply selling seed or publishing advice, Garst built his influence through demonstration. He created comparison fields where visitors could literally walk down rows and see the difference between traditional corn and hybrid varieties. One side of a field might show older open-pollinated corn, uneven in height, more vulnerable to disease, and lower in yield. The other side showed hybrid corn, uniform, strong, and significantly more productive under proper care. Farmers are practical people. They believe what they can see, and Garst understood that better than most agricultural experts of his era. He didn't lecture visitors. He walked them through the soil, picked up ears of corn, and talked about planting density, fertilization, and timing in plain language. Over time, skepticism slowly gave way to curiosity, and curiosity turned into adoption. Despite his growing influence, Garst faced resistance. Many farmers believed that traditional methods carried the wisdom of generations and should not be replaced by what they saw as laboratory farming. Some argued that hybrid corn made farmers dependent on seed companies. Others worried that scientific farming would weaken rural independence. Garst did not dismiss these concerns. Instead, he engaged them directly. He explained that better seeds did not replace farmer skill, they amplified it. Good farming, he argued, would always depend on human judgment, weather awareness, and experience. What hybrids offered was not control over nature, but a better partnership with it. Slowly, this message began to resonate. By the late 1940s, more farmers were trying hybrid corn, and those who followed Garst's guidance often saw dramatic improvements in yield. Word of mouth spread faster than any advertisement could. As Garst's reputation grew, so did his network. He was not just a local innovator anymore. Agricultural researchers, seed company representatives, and government officials began visiting his farm. He collaborated with agricultural scientists and supported research into crop improvement. His farm became a bridge between academic science and everyday farming practice. But what made Garst especially unusual was not just his agricultural influence. It was his openness to international exchange. During a time when global politics were becoming increasingly tense, particularly between the United States and the Soviet Union, Garst believed that agriculture could be a common language between nations. He often said that farmers everywhere faced the same basic challenges: weather, soil, pests, and the need to feed growing populations. In his view, these shared struggles could create understanding even where politics could not. This belief would eventually place him at the center of one of the most famous agricultural encounters of the 20th century. By the early 1950s, Garst's Iowa farm was attracting attention far beyond the Midwest. Agricultural delegations from other countries began requesting visits. They wanted to see how American farmers were achieving such high levels of productivity. Garst welcomed them. He believed that agriculture should not be isolated by borders. Knowledge, in his view, was something that should be shared if it could help feed people more effectively. This openness was unusual during the Cold War era, when suspicion between East and West was high. But Garst was not a political figure. He was a farmer who believed that better farming practices could reduce hunger anywhere in the world. Little did he know that this belief would soon bring one of the most powerful leaders of the 20th century to his doorstep. By the mid-1950s, Roswell Garst's farm in Iowa had become more than a model of agricultural productivity. It had become a place where politics, science, and farming unexpectedly intersected. At a time when the world was divided into opposing blocs, with the United States and the Soviet Union locked in ideological competition, very few Americans imagined that a farmer from Iowa would become part of international diplomacy. Yet Garst's work with hybrid corn and agricultural efficiency had already attracted global attention. He was known not only for his yields, but for his willingness to speak directly with anyone who wanted to learn: farmers, scientists, and even foreign officials. His belief was simple: if a method could grow more food, it deserved to be shared. That belief would soon bring him face to face with one of the most powerful leaders in the world. In 1955, Garst traveled to Europe and met Soviet agricultural officials who were struggling with low crop yields. Despite political tensions, the Soviets were deeply interested in American agricultural success. Food production was not just an economic issue. It was a matter of national survival. Garst spoke openly about hybrid corn, soil fertility, and mechanized farming. He did not present himself as a political figure, but as a practical farmer offering solutions. His straightforward style made an impression. Unlike formal diplomats, he spoke in terms of soil, seed, and weather rather than ideology. This meeting led to something unexpected, an invitation to visit his farm. In 1959, the world was stunned when Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev visited the United States. It was one of the most significant diplomatic moments of the Cold War. During his trip, Khrushchev insisted on visiting an American farm that represented modern agricultural success. Roswell Garst's farm was chosen. When Khrushchev arrived in Iowa, the atmosphere was tense but curious. Security was tight, journalists were everywhere, and the eyes of the world were watching. But Garst treated the visit not as a political event, but as a farm tour. He walked Khrushchev through fields of hybrid corn, explaining planting methods, fertilization strategies, and yield comparisons. He showed him machinery, storage systems, and demonstration plots. The Soviet leader, known for his blunt personality, asked direct questions. Garst answered them just as directly. There were no speeches about ideology, only conversations about farming. What made the visit remarkable was its focus. While Cold War tensions dominated global headlines, Garst and Khrushchev spent much of their time discussing something far more basic: how to grow enough food to feed people. Khrushchev was impressed by the scale and efficiency of American agriculture. He saw firsthand how hybrid corn and mechanized farming could dramatically increase production. Garst, in turn, emphasized that agricultural success required both science and education. Seeds alone were not enough. Farmers needed knowledge and training. Despite their political differences, both men recognized a shared truth. Hunger was a universal problem, and agriculture was one of the few tools capable of solving it. The visit became international news. Images of Khrushchev standing in Iowa cornfields circulated around the world. For many, it was surreal. Two figures from opposing systems standing in the same field discussing farming methods. For Garst, however, it was simply an extension of what he had always believed. Farming knowledge should cross borders. The visit led to increased agricultural exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. It also strengthened Garst's reputation as not just a farmer, but an informal ambassador of agricultural science. He had demonstrated something unusual for the era. Cooperation could exist even in the midst of deep political conflict if the goal was practical and shared. After Khrushchev's visit, Garst's farm became internationally famous. Delegations from many countries visited Iowa to study American agricultural methods. His fields were no longer just productive, they were symbolic. They represented a new idea, that modern farming was not just about tradition or labor, but about innovation, research, and global exchange. Garst did not seek fame, but he understood its usefulness. If attention brought more farmers to adopt better methods, then the attention served a purpose. Still, he remained grounded. Every morning he walked his fields, checked soil conditions, and spoke with visitors as a farmer first and a public figure second. By the early 1960s, Roswell Garst's influence had moved far beyond his home fields in Iowa. What had begun as a practical effort to improve corn yields had grown into a model that was reshaping how American agriculture operated at scale. Across the Midwest, farmers were increasingly adopting hybrid corn, improved fertilization methods, and more systematic planting strategies. Many of these ideas had been championed, demonstrated, or popularized through Garst's work. But Garst himself did not see this as a personal triumph. He saw it as the natural outcome of better knowledge being shared. The 1960s were a turning point in U.S. agriculture. Farming was becoming less about manual labor and more about systems, seed genetics, soil chemistry, machinery efficiency, and data-driven decision-making. Hybrid corn, which Garst had helped promote and normalize, was now widely adopted. It produced higher yields and more predictable harvests, which allowed farmers to plan more effectively and feed a rapidly growing population. This shift was not without challenges. Many small farms struggled to adapt to rising costs associated with modern equipment and commercial seed systems. Agriculture was becoming more capital-intensive, and this created new pressures in rural communities. Garst understood these tensions. He often emphasized that progress always came with trade-offs, but argued that the long-term benefit, greater food security, outweighed the difficulties of transition. By this time, Garst was spending as much time advising and demonstrating as he was actively farming. His fields functioned as open classrooms for visiting farmers, agricultural students, and international delegations. He would walk visitors through soil conditions, explain crop spacing decisions, and show how small changes in planting technique could produce measurable differences in yield. What made his teaching effective was its simplicity. He did not rely on abstract theory. He relied on visible evidence, rows of corn, harvest results, and direct comparison. Farmers trusted him because he spoke their language, not the language of academia, but the language of experience. The broader American farming landscape in the 1960s was undergoing rapid modernization. Government programs, university research, and private industry were increasingly interconnected. Agricultural science was becoming a formal discipline, and farmers were being encouraged to adopt new technologies and methods. In this environment, Garst's work served as a bridge between innovation and practice. He was not a bureaucrat or a researcher in a lab. He was someone who implemented ideas directly in the soil and proved their value under real conditions. This practical validation mattered deeply to farmers who were skeptical of change. Even after the famous visit by Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev in 1959, Garst continued to engage in international agricultural exchange. Delegations from developing countries visited his farm to learn about improving crop yields and food production systems. At a time when global food security was becoming an increasingly urgent issue, his farm served as an example of what could be achieved through improved agricultural methods. Garst often argued that hunger was not simply a matter of land availability, it was a matter of knowledge and efficiency. In his view, many regions of the world could dramatically increase food production if they had access to improved seeds, training, and equipment. Despite his reputation as an innovator, Garst did not dismiss traditional farming values. He understood that agriculture was deeply tied to culture, identity, and family heritage. What he advocated was not the abandonment of tradition, but its evolution. He believed that farming should retain its respect for land and seasonality, while also embracing scientific advancement. This balance, between respect for the past and openness to the future, was central to his philosophy. By the mid-1960s, Garst's name had become widely recognized in agricultural circles. Universities studied his methods, policymakers referenced his results, farmers continued to visit his land in large numbers. Yet he remained rooted in daily farm work. He continued to monitor crops, adjust practices, and engage directly with the land he worked. For Garst, credibility came from participation. He believed a farmer could not lead others without first continuing to farm. By the late 1960s, Roswell Garst's influence had become deeply woven into the story of modern agriculture in the United States. What began as one farmer's curiosity in Iowa had evolved into a movement that helped redefine how food was produced, distributed, and understood. Garst never set out to become famous. His goal was simple: grow better crops, reduce uncertainty, and help farmers produce enough food to meet the needs of a growing world. Yet his work ended up shaping agricultural thinking far beyond what he could have anticipated. By the end of the 1960s, hybrid corn was no longer experimental or controversial. It had become standard practice across much of American farming. The shift towards scientifically guided agriculture had accelerated rapidly, supported by university research, government extension programs, and private innovation. Farmers were now working with tools that earlier generations could hardly imagine: improved seed genetics, chemical fertilizers tailored to soil conditions, and increasingly efficient machinery. Much of this transformation reflected ideas that Garst had championed for decades: that agriculture should be treated as both a science and a practical craft, and that measurable results should guide farming decisions. But Garst also witnessed the complexities of modernization. As farms became more productive, they also became more expensive to operate. Smaller farms sometimes struggled to keep pace with larger, more capital-intensive operations. This shift led to changes in rural communities across the Midwest. Some farms expanded dramatically, while others were consolidated or left the industry altogether. It was a reminder that technological progress often brings both gains and difficult transitions. Garst acknowledged these realities openly. He never claimed that modernization was simple or painless. Instead, he argued that the long-term goal, feeding more people more reliably, required adaptation. One of Garst's most enduring beliefs was that agriculture transcended politics. His earlier relationship with the Soviet Union and his interactions with global leaders reinforced his conviction that food production was a shared human challenge. Even after the historic 1959 visit by Nikita Khrushchev, Garst continued to support international agricultural exchange. He believed that countries could learn from one another regardless of ideology. This perspective was not universally accepted during the Cold War era, but it helped open channels of agricultural communication that would influence global food development programs in later decades. Roswell Garst's legacy is not defined by a single invention or discovery. Instead, it lies in his ability to connect science with practice and innovation with trust. He helped demonstrate that farmers were not simply laborers following tradition, they could also be experimenters, educators, and innovators. His farm became a model for how agricultural knowledge could be tested in real-world conditions and shared widely. Many of the principles he promoted, such as hybrid seed adoption, soil-based decision-making, and field-based demonstration, remain foundational to modern agriculture. Long after his death, Garst's influence continues to be felt in how food systems operate. Modern agricultural efficiency, crop yields, and global food distribution systems all trace part of their development to the era he helped shape. Perhaps his greatest contribution was not just increasing productivity, but changing how farmers thought about farming itself. He encouraged a mindset where improvement was always possible, and where observation and experimentation were as important as tradition. Roswell Garst's life illustrates a powerful truth. Transformative change does not always come from laboratories or governments. Sometimes it begins in a field, with a farmer asking simple questions about why things are the way they are, and whether they could be better. From the cornfields of Iowa to international diplomacy, his work bridged worlds that rarely met, and through it all, he remained what he had always been, a farmer who believed that better knowledge could grow a better future. His story stands as a reminder that agriculture is not only about feeding people, it is also about curiosity, persistence, and the willingness to rethink what is possible. If you find this story educative, let me know where you are watching from. Also, like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories.